Welcome and thank you for joining us, folks. Welcome to our Pennsylvania Policy Center monthly state policy action Zoom meeting. We are really excited today to hear about what's going on in terms of current state budget negotiations. My name is Jeff Garris. I am the Outreach and Partnerships Director here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. I'm joined by a number of my colleagues, and we're really pleased to have so many folks from all across Pennsylvania joining us because we're going to be taking a very close look at the state budget, which I think if folks have been paying attention, you're aware we're into a third week now of the fiscal year for 25-26 without the budget enacted by the start of the fiscal year on July 1st. We're going to be talking about budget negotiations, what some of the challenges are. We're going to hear a little bit historic perspective about that, and we're going to hear also about current state of budget negotiations. We're really pleased that we will be having a couple of folks who've really got some experience working with the state budget and negotiating it. We have our former Governor Ed Rendell, who is joining us. We will also be joined later in the call by House Majority Leader Matt Bradford, who's going to give us a bit of an update on what's happening right now with budget negotiations, which could even be taking place at this very moment. I do want to thank you all for joining us. As we usually do for these meetings, if you have a question, you can type it in the chat. We've muted all the lines, so you'll be able to hear from all of our guests today, hear every word that they say, and be able to ask questions as well. And when you type them in the chat, I will go and pull as many questions as we can. We will present as many of your questions directly to our presenters today as time will permit. Speaking of time, we do try to wrap these up by 2 p.m. That is what we will be doing today. So we'll get moving very quickly now. Let me turn it over to my colleague and the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Policy Center, Mark Steer. Mark?
Hey, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We have a very exciting meeting today. I'm going to first just give a very quick update about what's happening with the budget, which, as Jeff says, is now 17 days late. Last week, the House Democrats, with 3 Republican supporters, passed a general appropriation bill. That, of course, is just a little step forward towards getting a budget, because, as you know, the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, and we will not have an appropriations bill passed until both House and Senate and the governor agree. And of course, the appropriations bill is only one part of the larger budget. To truly meet our needs this year, we're looking for a budget that includes cyber charter reform, funding for public transit, an increase in the minimum wage, and new revenues from the legalization of and tax on skill-based video gambling. The House and Senate has passed proposals on those 4 items. They're also waiting for Senate action, and some of them may be embodied in code bills that become part of the budget. Yesterday, the Senate Appropriations Committee amended the General Appropriations Bill by stripping all items except for one for rape crisis centers, which was a good move because, adding rape crisis centers because it was left out of the House budget. But it clearly was not a major step forward in the action, and then the Senate was supposed to come back today and then didn't. All I can say is I know that serious conversations are going on between the House Democrats and Senate Republicans, with the governor's office playing a role. And the way I know that serious negotiations are going on is that I don't hear very much about what's going on. When they're not really talking, everyone is talking to me with their ideas. When they get into a room and are really talking with one another, then it's very hard to find information. So I think that's good news that we're reaching some kind of progress. So I want to first now turn to introducing our first guest, Governor Ed Rendell. Will be joined after him by House Democratic Majority Leader Matt Bradford. During his 8 successful years in the office, Governor Rendell had some late budgets and some on-time budgets. So we're really glad to have him here, talk about his insights about the budget process and what he thinks about is at stake in the current budget. And one personal note, I want to say I got into issue advocacy during a transit crisis, funding crisis like we have right now. And I used to date my life by how many transit crises ago something happened. This was the first one in early 2000s. I first met Governor Rendell sitting around a big table as we worked with an advocacy group in his office trying to figure out how to get the Republicans to fund SEPTA and the other 40 or so transit agencies. He was very effective in ultimately getting that done. And, here we are again. So with no further ado, I turn it over to former Governor Ed Rendell.
Well, thanks, Mark. And it's a pleasure to be here. And the Policy Center has always been a very good advocate for progressive policies that help the people of Pennsylvania. And they fight the good fight as much as I think that myself and the men and women who work with me fought that fight for 8 years. And I actually want to correct one thing that Mark said. We never had an on-time budget. Never.
Oh,
The closest thing to an on-time budget was when I agreed to let the pay raise, to sign the pay raise. So I got that budget through in about 5 days. But that was the closest thing we got to an on-time budget. And I pride myself in that because I think although we got along better and it was easier to get legislation then than it is now, because the Harrisburg seemed to be different. When I got there, I was shocked at how different it was in the city of Philadelphia dealing with the legislature. But the legislature was almost all Democrat in Philadelphia. The city council had 3 Republicans and 14 Democrats. It was more of a issue of just dealing with what the individual Democrats wanted. But there was no ideological split. In fact, often the 3 Republicans agreed with some of the things I wanted to do more readily than some of the Democrats did. But we never had problems getting a budget and getting it on time. And John Street did a marvelous job. He was a great city council president during the 8 years I was mayor. He did a marvelous job holding council's feet to the fire and getting them to do some difficult things because we had to do difficult things. When I got to Harrisburg, there was some similarity to what happened in Philadelphia. When I became mayor of Philadelphia, we had the largest budget deficit in percentage of overall income, overall revenue spent that any city had in, I think, the history of the country. And that was our biggest dilemma. The second part of that was we had no ability to raise revenue. Our bond capacity was nil. We had raised taxes 18 times in the 11 years prior to me becoming mayor of Philadelphia. So I couldn't raise taxes, and we had to essentially eat away at a $250 million budget deficit by cuts in the way we did things, by doing things more cost savings, for coming up with some good ideas for generating revenue. And we did what I consider a miracle, and really was a result of the great people I got to come work for us. We balanced that budget in a year and a half. It was an incredible feat, and the New York Times said it was the most impactful effort of digging out of a budget that had happened in a long time in a major American city. But when I came to Pennsylvania and became governor, we were facing almost a $2 billion budget deficit, projected budget deficit. And I knew we could raise them. I knew we could do the same thing we did in Philadelphia, eliminate programs, run the government more efficiently, find new sources of revenue so that we could breach that gap. But I couldn't do it in 6 months. No way I could do it in 6 months. So the only way I could keep the government going was to raise taxes. And we did raise taxes. We raised the income tax. And of course, it's not a graduated income tax. It's tough to have a tremendous impact in doing that, but we did. And we got a lot of grief for raising tax. But it amounted to, I think, the average tax increase for Pennsylvania earning $40,000 a year was $58 a year. And I said that that was less than the price of one large coffee at Starbucks, one a month almost. It was unbelievable what a little dent that was. But it was the fact that money was, in fact, if we could have not announced that we were raising debt, almost nobody would have recognized it because it was such a little bite out of your paycheck. But we did have some feedback, but the Republicans were not totally against raising revenue. It was a different Republican Party, and the Republicans also wanted things done. I had Bob Jubalier as my Senate leader for 8 years. I had Joe Scarnati as President Pro Tem, and John Brazell for most of the time as the Speaker of the House. So those were people who wanted to do programs. And one of the things I learned right away is not to dismiss ideas that came from the other side. We did some very creative things that were suggested to me by the Republicans. I'll give you one example of the best program that they came up with. A lot of our property, a lot of our best property in Pennsylvania is owned by nonprofits. That's because we have so many universities, colleges, so many hospitals and medical centers that it took away our capacity to raise property taxes and generate a lot of money through that means. And it also took away the ability for us to do economic development programs that benefited that 40% of landholders. Because if you're a business that's nonprofit and doesn't pay any taxes, you don't pay any property tax. So it limited our ability to do things. And it was difficult because we used, I don't know if any of you will recall, but we passed a $2 billion economic stimulus program, money that went to the state's capital budget in my first year as governor. And we used that program to generate a ton of development in Pennsylvania. I mean, an incredible amount. And it was very successful. But the big problem when I first took over was a lot of that money was not available for helping nonprofits because they couldn't benefit from tax reduction or tax deferral. And so we had to figure out a way to do that. Well, Bob Jubalier, I think, came to me with an idea, I think it was Chip Brightfield too, that we take the nonprofits, and if they were going to want money to do a big capital project, and they thought that it would amount to, over the course of the next 10 years, amount to creation of 800 new jobs. And the average salary of those jobs was going to be $90,000 a year. We would take the state income tax that those jobs would have generated, and we wouldn't give them credit for 800 jobs in the first year. We made them tell us when those jobs would phase in, like 200 the first year, 200 the second year, 100 the third year, 100, 100, 100. So we worked out how much money they'd be generating in income tax. And we created a special program where nonprofits could get the income tax that they promised to generate from new jobs and use that for the development costs and repay it by generating the new income tax that would come from their projected new employees. And the way we protected ourselves was we had a program. The person, let's say they said they were generate 800 new jobs and that they would generate $15 million of wage tax. Well, if they didn't, if they generated $13 million of wage tax, they had to give us a $2 million check to pay for that failed projection. And most of the time, they reached the projection and did more so. So it was a very great project, and it generated a lot of development. At a time when we were looking for something to hold out as an incentive, for development for our nonprofit community. And that was a real part of making us come from, I think, when I took over as governor, we were 38th or 39th in economic growth. And when I left, we were 12th or 11th, something that I was very proud of and helped Pennsylvania dramatically. So it was a unique way of doing things. I developed a very good working relationship with leadership. I even did, when I was looking to generate our first budget, which had the income tax increase, I promised that I would give a letter to every Republican who voted for the tax increase, not endorsing them for re-election, but praising them for voting for the tax increase and saying that they help generate a lot of growth in their economic development for the Commonwealth. Now, the Democrats didn't like that very much, but I said it's only fair. You've got to recognize people who do things that are beneficial. And we did it, and that helped to assuage a lot of the difficulty in finding people to vote for these programs. So on the one hand, we had a great relationship and we did a lot of things together. But on the other hand, we fought all the time. And the reason we fought all the time was I came to Harrisburg with one goal. I regretted during my 8 years as mayor of Philadelphia that of all the things that I was responsible for as mayor, the one that we generated the least impact, least pot growth, that was our education system. We did improve test scores dramatically, but we didn't do as much as I thought we could. And I thought it was because the state always underfunded its responsibility. If you took the percentage that the state had agreed to fund, it was usually about 40. It was significantly lower than most states in the union paid towards education. And every year I fought hard to increase the revenue, the yearly revenue that was going into the school district. Sometimes just across the board increase, and sometimes increases per program. Like, for example, we instituted, I think in my 7th year as governor, we spent $250 million in the state's capital budget, creating enough computers so that every school could have a computer to give to a student, not to take home, but to give to the student, to take home, but not to keep in the state. We had enough computers that every student could access one in class and take one home. And it was an enormously successful program. I know how successful it was because we put it into operation. And in the second month, I got a lot of invitations to come to various schools around the state and explain the program. And all the Republicans who had voted against the program were there taking credit for the program. So I knew it was very successful. And it was successful. And we did a lot of terrific things by having the guts to raise taxes. And I think I'm still on record, although I don't know exactly what happened since I've been gone. But when I raised taxes in my first term, I was the first governor since the law expanded to allow governors to run for a second term. I was the first governor to raise taxes in my first term, knowing that I'd have to face that at an election day. And to show you how silly it is to worry about raising taxes, I got elected by 20% of the vote. I won 60 to 40. I ran for election. And not because of my opponent. I kid Josh Shapiro. Josh got reelected, but got elected by 14% of the vote. But he had an opponent who raised only $1 million. My opponent was Lynn Swan, who benefited from great notoriety. And Lynn spent $14 million, raised and spent $14 million, which is considerably more than $1 million. Not as much as $43 million. money that we raised, but still, 14 million was not chopped liver. So, the fight over education went on. We created some very novel programs. I think a lot of Republicans would say at the end of my 8 years that the schools in their district benefited by the things we did. And I was very proud of what we did in education. And it made up for my feeling that we hadn't done as much as we could have in Philadelphia in my term as mayor. So I'm going to stop there and answer any questions you might have, with the caveat that I'm not an insider. I don't know strategy. I've talked to a few people on both sides of the aisle. I do talk to Governor Shapiro a lot, sometimes mostly about national issues and the effect on national issues on the state. Because I've determined, and I said that I would do this when I ran for office, that I would, after I was no longer in public office, I would continue to raise money for good Democrats who were going to effectuate effective policy, because I felt honor bound to do that. Was when I was governor, I asked so many people far and wide, not just in Pennsylvania, to raise money to help me get elected and do the things that I want. So I have become the answer to who's the most feared phone call. Have your secretary buzz and say, Mr. Jones is on the phone. Who's the most feared phone name that you don't want your secretary to say is on the phone? And it was Ed Rendell and Lance.
Well, thank you, Governor, for reflecting on your time and the state budgets you negotiated and some of the big battles that you fought and that you won on behalf of the people of Pennsylvania. There is one battle that is still going on, and you were the last governor who was in office when the General Assembly of Pennsylvania raised the minimum wage, and that was in 2006. We have not had the General Assembly raise the minimum wage since then. We did bump up slightly when the federal government raised it a couple years later. But that is still one battle that is a real battle for justice and economic prosperity. One of the questions someone dropped in the chat here was, what arguments were successful in getting an increase in the minimum wage during your administration?
Well, common sense. The minimum wage was, correct me if I'm wrong, was $7.25 at the time. No, it was $5.
$5.15.
$5.25. It was $10,000. That was what your guaranteed wage was if you were on minimum wage. And we pointed out what you could buy for $10,000. And we were asking for a minimum wage hike of over 5 years. It would have gone to 2 full percent, so it would have gone to $7.25 an hour. And that minimum wage raise increase would have gotten the average salary for workers on minimum wage to go to $14,000. And I said to people, now, $4,000 raise for a lot of Pennsylvanians. Pennsylvanians are making the average salary of $40,000, $50,000 a year. $4,000 raise wouldn't be that much, wouldn't have that much of an impact. But if you were making $10,000 a year and you had 3 kids, and one of the things we did, we showed statistics that disabused the common misconception that everyone on the minimum wage was teenagers. Most people on the minimum wage were parents with children. And so there was a time for, that's a small dog, loud barks. At a time when $4,000 a year was a considerable increase in the things that people on minimum wage could do. We talked to a lot of individuals on minimum wage, got some ideas of what they did. And the average person we talked to served meat to their families 2 days a week. When we increased by $4,000, they were able to serve meat to their families 5 days a week. Simple thing like that. Simple thing like that. They almost never went to the movies. They had the money to take their kids to the movie. Simple things like that. And when you put it like that, the average person is not against raising the minimum wage, regardless of their political affiliation. And if you look at national poll, most Republicans are not against raising the net minimum because people understand how little $14,000 a year was. People understand how little even $15 minimum wage is. And I found always that you could get to people by giving them the facts. Too many political folks don't give people the facts. Give them the facts. Translate what it's going to mean for the average person. Like I know when we did an increase in, it was something we were doing for the environment, and it was going to cost the average citizen.
Thank you, Governor. We really appreciate your advocacy for workers and for workers being able to have the kind of dignity that people should get every day when they're at work. Just wanted to note here a couple of comments for you. We do have Leader Bradford has joined us, and we'll be going to him momentarily. But a couple of folks, Jennifer said, "Thank you, Governor," from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Kristen acknowledged that you made some real great accomplishments on education. She notes, "My parents were among the first public school educators to take part in the Classrooms of the Future program. They went from having minimal classroom technology to having a smart board and Chromebooks for each of their students." Kristen says, "Thank you for that." I do want to ask one final question here before we go to Leader Bradford. Hopefully this isn't too controversial, but now that we've talked about some of the challenges, let's go to the really big issues. Any predictions or prognostications for the Eagles or the Steelers for the 2026 season?
Well, I'll answer that, but you want to just give one example of what you were talking about. I was out in my 6th or 7th year as governor. I was out doing something in Adams County, and a woman came up to me. I was in a supermarket, and a woman came up to me and said, "Governor, I didn't vote for you, but I want to thank you. I've had 3 daughters, and each one of them is smart as a whip." And she said the first 2 went through 8th grade and 5th grade before you were governor, and they didn't have access to computers. And my 3rd daughter, she's the smartest of them all. And all my daughters are going to succeed in life, but my 3rd daughter, she's going to be something. And because of you, she got computers in the 5th grade, and she got all-day kindergarten, and all those advances that my first 2 daughters didn't get. And it's not that she's smarter than the first 2, but she was so much more advanced by the time she got out of 5th grade than my other 2 daughters were. And I know that you did that. So I want to thank you very much. And I said, "You don't have to thank me, just telling me thanks enough." And it was. And my prediction is that the Steelers will do better this year. I think they'll make the playoffs. And I think the new quarterback, the old Green Bay Packer, is going to give them an extra dimension in their offense. And they're going to be someone to reckon with. I don't think they can win the AFC. They're just not quite that strong. The Eagles should be the best team again in the NFC. The Eagles did a great job in building incredible strength at all levels of the game. And they kept most of their people, so they're in pretty good shape. And they should win. I think they've got the best talent of any of the teams in the league. Of course, you can't account for injuries. And if the Eagles' back goes down, we're in trouble. But if all things being equal, the Eagles should repeat again. And I think it'll be the Eagles versus Buffalo for the Super Bowl.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens, and maybe we'll see some of our friends here at the top of the light poles in Philadelphia.
Well, and let me say hello to Matt Bradford. He was a young tyke when I was governor, but he showed great promise, and I think he's realized that promise as leader. So thanks, guys. Nice talking to you.
Thank you, Governor. Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you to welcome the leader of the House of Representatives, Pennsylvania.
Great timing. I just got a text that says he's on. I'm very happy to introduce the House Democratic leader, Matt Bradford. He's the guy who's been fighting for many of the things we've been fighting for all year long. And there's no one better place to tell us what's happening, when we might have a budget and what might be in it. It's not all up to him, but he's our champion in the room. So I'm really pleased that he's here with us today. Leader Bradford, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thanks everyone for having me. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the gentleman who I think just ducked off, our former governor. But when I was elected, Governor Rendell was in the final 2 years of his term. But my time kind of growing up in Montgomery County politics, and people forget not that long ago, Montgomery County was a very red county. Governor Rendell was his leadership and navigating the city of Philadelphia out of a pretty dark time to much better days. And then as governor, and the fight that he made, making education and progressive politics at the forefront, but also making it very popular in parts of what was a very red suburban county at the time, was a real, it's a real testament to his power of his personality and just the way he led the city and the state. And he's the gold standard by which many of us are judged. So I just wanted to pay tribute to Governor Rendell and everything he's done, not just for the city, the state, but for a lot of young Democratic politicians who are no longer very young. So myself, big first among the list. So he's the real deal. But with that, Mark has invited me to speak, if only briefly, and take some questions about where we are in terms of the budget situation. And obviously, we all wish, especially those of us who find ourselves spending more time in Harrisburg in July than we would like to, trying to get this hammered out and get to a good place. I think rightfully the last few budgets, everyone's kind of learned to kind of negotiate over the deadline with a recognition that, if everyone cooler heads prevail, that we can get through this and work through it. We've been able to do really big things. And, Governor Shapiro has shown kind of his stable leadership has served us well in terms of popularity, but also, frankly, in terms of scoring real big progressive wins, whether it's the dependent care tax credit, frankly, getting the first installment of the Commonwealth Court ruling on public education funding. We've been able to do those things without a lot of fanfare or without a lot of the, kind of the protracted mean budget fights. And obviously this year, because of the challenges surrounding mass transit, making sure we make the second installment of the fair funding requirements, but also the challenges that are coming from the chaos and craziness from our president and our national leaders in Washington, D.C. Dealing with those challenges has made what should have been a pretty simple budget in the grand scheme of things a little more complicated. Though I will say, not as complicated as some on the right have made it, and not as complicated as our friends on the Republican side have made it. And I say that because, frankly, SEPTA is a no-brainer. Those of us who live in the Southeast recognize SEPTA is a lifeline for our workforce. It is a pro-business thing. I jokingly say you probably wouldn't find, Chris Franklin, the head of the Pittsburgh Chamber, on the same side as the Budget and Policy Center in Pennsylvania, and yet you've got the Philadelphia head of the chamber saying, like, what are you doing? We need to get this done. This is a pro-business thing. This is a workforce issue. I jokingly say, and I don't mean to be trite about it, but the people that are, parking under the old J.C. Penney at the King of Prussia Mall, they take SEPTA in part because, frankly, there's nothing affordable within 20 miles of the jobs that they serve our economy and our community there. But they're also not taking SEPTA because, the BMWs in the shop. These are people who use SEPTA as a lifeline to their jobs. They're jobs that serve our communities. And for the job creators in the Chamber of Commerce crowd, they're the folks that frankly do the jobs because we pay them wages in many cases, that's what they can afford. And I also say, from one of those new Democratic districts that Governor Rendell helped make so blue in Montgomery County, we also view SEPTA as a quality of life issue. The fact that we've got the desirability of communities like Ambler and Lansdale and the entire R5 corridor, those communities are what they are because of SEPTA being what it is. And if you love the idea of spending more time in traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway or never making it to the Phillies game, put all those additional cars on the road. And I'll kind of put a not too fine of a point on it, but to say this too. When you talk about the long-term economics of this Commonwealth and where so much of the economic generation is coming from, and again, this isn't to be parochial or myopic or play East versus West, but when you look at the southeastern corner of our Commonwealth, the economic generation that is spurred from southeastern Pennsylvania, frankly, at a time where many parts of our state is getting older and economically as well as demographically in terms of population contracting, we need to be honest about what these cuts would mean immediately to SEPTA. And I noticed by the comments at the bottom, and you're not wrong, long-term PRT will have these same challenges. And frankly, mass transit, while it's easy to be myopic, and I'm guilty of it about talking about SEPTA in southeastern Pennsylvania, just because they're going to be the first ones over the cliff, but it is a 67 county issue. So that is probably a long-winded way of saying all those challenges are out there. But I also want to pin one more thing to my Republican friends, which is their allies in Washington, D.C. have created what I will call a real challenging horizon for us here in the Commonwealth. We recognize, again, particularly in rural Pennsylvania, areas that are going to be, disproportionately, brutally impacted by these Medicaid cuts that our friends in Washington, D.C. have put forward, rural health systems that are least capable to handle because of their payer mix, frankly, because of the communities they serve, frankly, because of the high numbers of Medicaid in those communities. Those impacts that are going to impact our Commonwealth's budget in these out years, the demographics that exist in those parts of the Commonwealth. So those are kind of the challenges that are upon us. Those are the kind of challenges economically, demographically that we're going to deal with. We've got to be mindful of making sure we fulfill our commitment to K-12 education due to the Commonwealth. We need to do the Commonwealth court case. We need to make sure we do our part in terms of transit. We need to keep our social safety net in place. And we've got to remember that we have Republican friends, even at this late hour, who've put forward cuts to higher ed, who've put forth, they want to put their own fingerprints on cuts to Medicaid, which strikes me as not just bad public policy, but politically insane in light of what our friends in Washington, D.C. have already done. Our caucus obviously is not going to be part of anything that looks like cuts to the intellectual disabled community. We're trying to make progress on these things, not moving backward. So I think that kind of frames the discussion around some of the big ticket items in this year's budget, but there's still more work to be done. And then with that, Mark, I'll turn it back to you to answer any specific questions you may have around the budget, the status, where we're at, and kind of where we go from here. Hopefully in the next few days, if not few weeks, to get this thing resolved and make sure we make our commitment to working Pennsylvanians.
Jeff, we have some questions in the chat you want to
Thanks so much, Leader Bradford. Yeah, thanks, Mark. We've got a bunch of questions here, so we'll try to do these pretty rapid fire for you, Representative Bradford. Nicole has a question. With the trickle down of Medicaid budget cuts, Is the General Assembly considering prioritizing funding for optional programs like the adult dental benefit, which actually realizes cost savings on medical spending?
Ironically, some of our we have a pretty de minimis dental program under MA already in Pennsylvania. The costs are pretty small. I can tell you some on the Republican side have proposed actually, instead of expanding that benefit, have actually talked about getting rid of that benefit. Again, one of the things that we've made clear, and the governor is a great partner in this, has made clear, your friends in Washington, D.C. have already made their choices around MA cuts. We don't want our fingerprints on those type of choices. We have $10.5 billion in reserve in this Commonwealth, thanks to the strong fiscal stewardship of our governor. And the idea that we would be engaging in these type of policy decisions at this point, frankly, because of the very allies of the people in Harrisburg who are doing this in Washington, D.C., there's just not the support in the Democratic House for those type of decisions and priorities.
Thank you for that answer, and thanks for the question as well. Another question here from Jeff, our friend at State Independent Living Council, Transportation Alliance. Where are we with a home care rate increase in this state budget? A home care increase needs to include both consumer and participant directed as well as agency models of care.
Yeah. So we obviously all recognize the challenge around providing services at a time where wages are deflated in no small part because rates are not where they need to be. It's frankly bad for the consumer. It's bad for the worker. It is bad public policy, and these choices have only gotten more difficult. Again, I'm not one in the business of selling people false hope. The governor's proposed budget makes some incremental and very important investments. We're not going to get it all done in one budget, and you can tell by the challenges we're kind of some of the obstructionist challenges we're meeting from the other side that we will try to make progress, but we're not going to get it all done in any budget, let alone in this budget year.
Thank you. Another question here, this one related a bit to education and talking a bit about, doing some of the funding that we can this year and looking ahead to future years. John has a question, which is, please let us know the status of the education public school adequacy funding targeting PA's poorest school districts.
Yeah, for most of us, this is something that we're not really willing to move on. You can imagine we have the Damocles of the Commonwealth Court that has been very clear that this is not a want to have, that the court has mandated this. All parties to that litigation agreed that, and frankly consented by not filing an appeal, that they would not reverse course as it was. Many of us did not want to see it take as long as what was proposed, which I believe we're in an 8-year trajectory to get to full funding. We're not willing to slow down. Frankly, this has gone on for too long. The impacts on our kids, on the communities, the overtaxation that's happened in those school districts because of the failure to fund these schools appropriately. 526 is a number that does not leave my mind a lot, which is the adequacy plus the school equity provisions that is in the original deal, and that is where we need to be.
A related question regarding education funding is a question from, I can't actually see, initials are PH. The question is this the year PA finally does cyber charter reform?
We did make incremental reforms last year. There are entrenched interests, but I will tell you, even my Republican friends are recognizing that you can't seriously talk about the need to attack waste, fraud, and abuse when you see some of the ways that money is being spent. And you look at the real estate, some of the Inquirer reporting on this has been very interesting, seeing some of the real estate holdings, seeing the cash balances that are held by these cyber schools. I didn't realize that cyber schools needed so much real estate. I didn't know they needed such cash balances. I think there's a Democrat and Republican bicameral recognition that this has gotten way, way out of control. I applaud the advocate community for frankly getting many of our Republican school districts and school directors to say this is not an appropriate use, and at the rates is appropriate. I think we're making progress. Again, we're not going to get it all in one budget, the type of reforms many of us would like, but I think there's a very good chance that we will get even more robust reforms. The House, I don't want to sell my House colleagues and ourselves short what progressive chamber was able to do. We proposed, I believe it was almost $600 million of savings that could be realized. We want to get a serious chunk of that to take the impact off of our schools that are seeing money, frankly, that going to schools that are not delivering in terms of academic production. Many of the very people who are quick to critique public education, which is so wrongheaded, would never, ever abide the lack of transparency in terms of finances, but just the woefully inadequate academic performance of these schools. We should not be afraid to shine the mirror very clearly on those that are defending mismanagement and academic failure.
Thanks so much for that question, and thank you for the thoughtful answer, Leader Bradford. A question that kind of gets at the connection between education and also some of the healthcare and Medicaid issues coming from the federal level. Colleen says, I'm a parent and advocate for people with disabilities. I'm concerned about home and community-based services through Medicaid waivers that keep people out of institutions. These services are optional. What can be done to prevent cuts?
Elections matter. I don't mean to be horribly political about it. Getting folks elected to office that will not abide these type of cuts. We've been on the losing side of some elections recently. And I think a lot of us didn't believe they would actually make these kind of cuts, and we'll see what they go forward with and what it looks like going forward. It does worry me, and for those who have family members and families that are going to be directly impacted, we shall see what this looks like going forward.
Thanks for that question. Another question, kind of the impact on families and parents with children. Question here, and obviously beyond just that, the question from Blake is, can you share, are there any bills that are being negotiated as part of the budget process, such as the Family Care Act?
We would love to see, and I will give some of my Republican friends credit who have stepped forward and said they have a desire to see paid family leave as part of this budget or standalone. There's a ways to go still to get that done. I've mentioned to some of the advocates, I think there's an opportunity maybe in the fall. I'm not convinced we're going to get it. I would love to get a minimum wage as part of this budget too. Those who talk about MA and the cost, one of the best ways, frankly, to get people off of MA isn't by pulling the rug from under them, but to pay them a wage that's sufficient for them to afford insurance either in the private sector or in the marketplace. So I would love to tell you we're going to get all of this in this budget. I try to be pragmatic. We have again a strong ally in the governor, and House Democrats continue with our huge one-seat majority to hold strong on a lot of these issues. But we believe that sticking together, we're on the side of the angels.
Looking at the time here, we have a couple minutes for a few more questions. I'm going to combine a couple questions we got that are related to Medicaid and healthcare. This seems to be a big priority here right now. One is the question, are you concerned that the cuts to Medicaid will negatively impact the rural health model? And another person asks, what do the federal cuts to Medicaid, what impact will that have on nursing home care?
Yeah, very worried. Again, one of the things I find, I guess not amusingly ironic about my Republican friends who largely represent rural red state Pennsylvania If you've ever had an opportunity to look at the MA numbers in rural Pennsylvania, the impacts are going to be disproportionately affected in their districts. Those of us in these new Democratic districts out in the suburbs, our payer mix is makes it easier for our health systems. Not easy by any means, but easier to absorb these type of cuts. The payer mix that exists in rural Pennsylvania, their health systems tend to be smaller and not as well leveraged or hedged against the type of cuts you're going to see. So I am very worried about what's going to happen, frankly, in my Republican friends. One of the things that was a little disheartening, and I hope Leader Pittman misspoke when he said it, but basically said, SEPTA is basically their problem and let them figure it out. I never want to be so mindlessly parochial that I would say, because Democrats don't necessarily represent rural Pennsylvania, that it's not our problem. Those hospitals, those health systems, those Pennsylvanians, they are all of our challenge. They are all of our citizens. They are all our brothers and sisters, and they all need access to quality health care.
Thanks so much for all the great questions folks have submitted. Thank you, Leader Bradford. We're going to go with two more quick questions to wrap it up in the interest of time. Going to go with a question here from Nicole, who's with Transit Forward Philly. Nicole notes SEPTA is going to start making cuts on August 24th. Is there a goal to pass a budget or partial before that date?
Listen, the House Democrats are proud to point out that we've passed it 4 different times. Most recently with a road and bridge component. That was the most recent ask of our Republican friends. They've asked for bonding authority at different times. They've asked and tied it to skill games legislation at different times. They've tied it to safety on the system, special prosecutor. I can go through the amount of things. At some point, they've got to take yes for an answer. We have shown ourselves to be very pragmatic and accept things that, we don't love fare increases. We realize it makes it less affordable for those who need it. But I got to tell you, we are a pragmatic bunch. I say all the time, it's the most humble 102 majority you'll ever see. Working with our governor, who's, kind of cornered the market on being a pragmatic, thoughtful politician. We are willing to do tough things and look at reforms, but what we cannot do is allow or abide by the mass shutdown of the transit system in the most important economic portion of our Commonwealth, and the economic impacts that would flow from that, and the economic carnage for those families that rely on SEPTA. And again, it's not just the workforce. It's the kids in Northeast Philly who go to St. Hubert's. It's the second shift that works at the nursing home. It is unimaginable that any responsible politician would think this is a leverage point or something cute, or again, something that's parochial that is not their obligation to worry about. This is every Pennsylvanian's obligation. And am I hopeful? I believe responsible minds will carry the day, but frankly, we shouldn't have gotten this far down this road.
Yep. And speaking of this far down this road, we are almost at the end of the road for our Zoom meeting here today, but we do have one final question, which is from Jason. Any word on new revenue from gaming or marijuana?
Yeah, so obviously the House has passed adult use cannabis. We are open to see what the Senate can pass. Dan Laughlin in the western part of the state has a vehicle in his committee. He now has his own legislation that he says he supports. We look forward to seeing what he can pass in short order. I wish he could have gotten it done in time for this budget. If his leadership takes any longer, maybe it will get done as part of this budget. But having said that, that's really going to be on Chairman Laughlin to get that through his committee in short order. Skill games is obviously, it continues to be an issue. I will tell you, when we first came in the majority and I got this leadership role 2 years ago, at that point, our Republican friends said they would have us a bill in 2 weeks. So 2.5 years later, they continue to tie themselves in knots on that issue. I hope they can get it done. I believe there's a path forward, but we shall see. I look forward to getting this wrapped up. I believe there are opportunities, though, to bring in revenue such as what we've discussed, as opposed to slashing and burning social safety nets and frankly rejecting the model that has been put forward by our friends in Washington, D.C.
Thank you so much for answering these questions, for taking the time today, Leader Bradford. We know you've got a lot going on. We can tell you also want to get on the road. You appear to be behind the wheel there. So we will let you get going. But again, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone for all the great questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to every single one. Mark, do you have any final word you'd like to have for wrapping us up here today?
No, we will keep everyone informed, and good luck, Leader Bradford, as you work through these negotiations. We know how difficult it is. Thank you for being.
Well, thank you.
Thank
My
you.
only I was gonna say my only regret is I don't get to ask questions about the Eagles season ahead. This is outrageous.
We'll have you back again, and we'll do an all Eagles special. So after the budget's passed. Again,
so
thank you to my colleagues here at the Pennsylvania Policy Center. Thank you to all of you for making the time. Just so you're aware, we typically do the state policy action meeting here on the third Thursday at 1 p.m., which is what it is today. Some of you have joined us for the federal policy action meetings on Thursdays, the first Thursday at 1 p.m. I just want to make sure everybody's aware. We will not be doing any of these meetings for the month of August. So you have your first and third Thursdays at 1 p.m. Open for the month of August to do some real advocacy here around these really important issues. Again, thanks to everybody. Thanks to all of our friends. Thanks for your support. Have a great day, everyone.
See y'all.